Tim Walz is out there talking again.
You say he could fight any Trump supporter?
Yeah, he says he kicked their and they're scared of him because he could fix a truck. Like they're threatened by his masculinity. I know how to fix a truck. That's what he said. I'm like, do you? I bet you don't.
The lady doth protest too much.
I bet you don't.
I fear.
I bet if I bring a broken truck to you and a bag of tools.
You were saying that men he worked with in the National Guard in Nebraska went to the FBI because they believed he had given classified military secrets to the Chinese government?
They suspect that he did.
Suspected to the point that they went to the FBI.
And then China started producing almost a carbon copy of this military tank a couple of years later.
Come on. For real?
According to all of our...
Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson just dragged Minnesota Governor Tim Walz into the spotlight, and let's just say it wasn't a flattering portrait. Rogan unleashed a storm of disbelief, laced with razor-edged humor that left no room for political niceties. Meanwhile, Tucker came in like a chef with a vendetta, slicing through Walz's policies with surgical precision and zero hesitation. They didn't just critique, they dismantled. From pandemic misfires that left jaws on the floor to a crime wave that reads like a script from a dystopian thriller, Walz was laid bare. If bad leadership ever needed a spokesperson, this showdown just handed it a name, a face, and a painfully awkward highlight reel.
So, who is Tim Walz exactly? Most of us, I just want to say I think he's should be investigated by the Sex Crimes Unit. I really feel that way. I'm not asking you to comment on that, but he's one of the creepiest people I've ever seen. The vibe I get off that guy, I would not let him in my house. That's just my feeling. Maybe I'm being total.
Joe Rogan leaned back, arms crossed, that classic look of amused skepticism creeping across his face. Like someone had just tried to convince him tofu could pass for prime rib. The topic? Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. And Rogan wasn't in the mood to sugarcoat. What followed wasn't a polite critique. It was a full-throttle blitz of logic, frustration, and hard-hitting questions. You could almost hear the gloves hit the floor. With each word, Rogan carved into the failures like a butcher with a score to settle. This wasn't just commentary, it was a high-octane roast, and unfortunately for Walz, he was the bullseye on the dartboard.
Sure that is? Yeah. You shoot a guy in the face and the dude's like, yeah, I look like a bird. Don't worry about it.
I look like a dude. Is there any way to you that we're not being gaslit by Kamala Harris?
In what way?
Wasn't she a joke even among Democrats?
Rogan started by homing in on Tim Walz's handling of the pandemic, and he didn't pull punches. With a chuckle and a slow shake of the head, he looked like someone trying to process the plot of a low-budget sci-fi film. According to Rogan, Walz treated Minnesota like his own personal science experiment, except the rules felt less scientific and more like a riddle wrapped in red tape. Small businesses were shuttered, kids stayed locked out of classrooms, yet somehow big box retailers kept buzzing like nothing happened. Rogan skewered the absurdity, joking that shutting down gyms, but keeping liquor stores open made it seem like Walz genuinely believed vodka was more effective than vitamin D and cardio combined.
Anniversary. They were married 5 years after Tiananmen Square, and he picked that date because it was a date that they would remember, he and his wife.
What?
Who does that?
Tiananmen Square?
Correct.
The tank crushing the lone protester? That's
their wedding anniversary. And they went to China for their honeymoon.
Come on. You're sure he picked the anniversary?
They've talked about this
in
interviews. Yeah, this is in newspapers.
But Tiananmen Square was a massacre of peaceful protesters.
I know.
Do you think they picked it to in the memory of those brave souls who died opposing the machine?
They haven't said that.
Oh my.
Then came the mask mandates, and Rogan's reaction was instant. He rolled his eyes with the kind of exasperation usually reserved for cafeteria mystery meat flashbacks. With biting sarcasm, he painted Tim Walz as a man flipping through a pandemic playbook, both written by hyperactive Twitter crusaders and career bureaucrats who hadn't felt sunlight since dial-up internet. This wasn't leadership rooted in science, Rogan argued. It was full-blown pandemic performance art. Walz played the dramatic lead, while everyday Minnesotans were cast as bewildered extras trying to follow a script that changed every scene. The result? A state caught somewhere between a health directive and an improv sketch.
much. If the people in Minnesota like it, like, who cares? It's just a star and some colors. The real problem is when you hear discussions of things that are like openly Marxist philosophies, when you hear talk about equal outcomes and, you know, and not just equal opportunity, but that we all need to arrive at the same place, equal outcome talk. There's only one way they can do that, and it's by forcing you.
Well, it's by everyone having nothing.
Yeah.
That's the only way to have things totally equal. Because
Exactly.
you can't have everyone have everything. That's impossible.
Right. There's no way. There's not enough.
And then came the riots, and Rogan wasn't even furious at first. He was stunned. His reaction wasn't fire. It was pure disbelief, like watching someone try to put out a kitchen fire with a can of hairspray. The way Governor Walz responded to the George Floyd protests, and more critically, the violent chaos that followed, left Rogan momentarily speechless, which is saying something. But the silence didn't last. He launched into the topic with the intensity of someone watching leadership completely abandon ship. Rogan compared the scenes in Minneapolis to a post-apocalyptic movie, scorched streets and shattered windows included. Meanwhile, Walz's game plan: look startled and say nothing as city blocks burn to the ground.
Talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it.
First of all, kudos to CBS for allowing Governor Walz to quote Matthew 25:40 without interrupting him and saying, I'm sorry, that's an attempt at bringing in foreign disinformation campaigns. We can't accept that.
May those words burn on your tongue.
Right.
Rogan didn't hold back when it came to Walz's handling of civil unrest. It was brutal, hilarious, and a little too real. He joked that it felt like Governor Walz was auditioning for the Guinness World Record in slowest emergency response, as if he needed the fire itself to file a formal complaint before springing into action. According to Rogan, this wasn't leadership. It was someone holding press conferences like they were sciences, hoping the smoke would just get bored and leave. It wasn't governance. It was like watching a substitute teacher try to manage a classroom with nothing but a pamphlet, a whiteboard marker, and blind optimism. Then Rogan pivoted to education, and that's when the real fireworks started. He didn't just criticize Walz's relationship with the teachers' unions, he lit it up. He compared it to a hostage situation where the unions weren't partners but puppet masters. Schools were shut down so long, Rogan joked, some kids thought a pencil was just a stylus that didn't work. Union leaders, meanwhile, were treated like ancient prophets. Every demand they made delivered as if it were chiseled into sacred stone tablets. Public education, Rogan said, had morphed into a political vending machine. You put in a slogan, and out came absolutely nothing. And then came crime. Rogan laid into the violent crime wave, carjackings, spiking assault rates, and plummeting police morale. Minneapolis under Walz sounded more like a video game set in hard mode. Uber drivers should have been issued hazard pay, and officers were being investigated more than the people they arrested. Rogan imagined Walz calmly sipping coffee from a mug that read, "Please don't blame me," while the city outside looked like the opening scene of a disaster movie.
It's going to inherit your soul. They don't want it bogged down with bad habits.
Right. Yeah, well, they don't want it to be evil. They
Right.
want it to have negative energy attached to it and the karma of killing a bunch of people. Like,
Right.
who wants Dick Cheney's soul? You know? The alien's like, you could have that, dude.
Remember when he shot someone and then the guy apologized
Yeah.
to him? Isn't that nuts?
You know how gangster that is?
Yeah.
You shoot a guy in the face and the dude's like, yeah, I look like a bird. Don't worry about it.
I
Yeah.
look like a dude. Is there any way to you that we're not being gaslit like to hell by Kamala Harris?
In what?
Then, like a seasoned comic with a razor in his punchlines, Rogan turned his sights on Walz's public persona. And it got brutally entertaining. He said the governor always looked like a man seconds away from apologizing for a problem he didn't fully grasp. His tone, his posture, even the way he delivered statements, it wasn't leadership. It was the political version of a shrug in a suit and tie. Rogan painted Walz as the kind of guy you'd find nervously leading a fire drill during an actual fire. A middle manager with PowerPoint slides on crisis response, while smoke curls from the ceiling tiles. And then came Tucker Carlson, less stand-up comic, more surgical assassin. While Rogan came with heat, Tucker arrived with cold precision. No yelling, no dramatic flair. Just that familiar, chilling half-smile that warned, "I'm about to peel back your public mask, quietly and thoroughly." He began with a single word: weak. Tucker said Walz was the prime example of what happens when ideology drowns out reality. When a leader trades decisiveness for deference. He didn't see a governor. He saw a feelings manager, so allergic to conflict, so desperate to appease, he mistook hesitation for humanity. Walz, in Carlson's view, wasn't steering Minnesota through chaos.
I think it's fake. All of it.
Well, that Walz guy, I mean, I don't want to be too unfair because I don't know him and I don't have any hard evidence. He's a weirdo. That guy's weird.
He seems very strange.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
There's something not right about that guy's personal life. So I hope I'm wrong because I don't want people like that with power. But most people I know with power in Washington have personal lives who would not withstand.
Then Tucker turned to one of the most defining moments of Tim Walz's tenure, his response to the George Floyd incident. Not from the lens of compassion, but from the gaping void where leadership should have stood. Tucker wasn't criticizing Walz for empathy, he hammered him for absence. At the precise moment when Minnesota was crying out for clarity, courage, and command, Walz faded into the background, offering nothing but carefully rehearsed sorrow and buzzword-laden speeches. Tucker compared it to a ship captain pulling out a therapy manual while the vessel steered straight into an iceberg. People didn't need counseling metaphors. They needed a steady hand on the wheel. Then came Law and Order, the centerpiece of Tucker's takedown. He argued that Minnesota had been turned into a social experiment for soft-on-crime fantasies, and Walz was the lead scientist. According to Tucker, public safety had been handed over to ideological activists while everyday Minnesotans were left to bear the consequences. This wasn't about data points. It was about lives torn apart, businesses destroyed, and neighborhoods left to fend for themselves. Tucker skewered the image of police being vilified, treated like relics of a bygone era, while chaos was rebranded as progress. Walz, he said, didn't just fail to stop it, he enabled it, shielding his image while his constituents lived in fear. And Tucker wasn't done. He took a sharp turn into economic policy, claiming that under Walz, Minnesota became a cautionary tale in real time. Tax hikes, regulatory overreach, and a political tone deafness that pushed the middle class to pack up and flee. He said it felt less like economic strategy, and more like a step-by-step guide on how to drive people across state lines. Meanwhile, Walz was out front giving speeches on equity, like a man hosting a seminar on financial growth, while standing in a building with the lights turned off and the doors marked for lease.
Choosing the new flag and seal made its final selections this week, and the new design will debut next year. It follows 4 months of meetings, many spirited debates, and 2,500 submissions from the public sharing their ideas for the new symbols.
This is why they changed it, is he said it was problematic.
Problematic. Oh, I love that term. Our current flag is problematic. I think we all know that. We've evolved into a more diverse state, and I think it's more reflective.
Then came the cultural battlefield, and that's when Tucker really started swinging. With a smirk and surgical precision, he tore into what he called Walz's performance politics. Tucker didn't see a governor managing a diverse state. He saw a man auditioning for applause from a niche, online elite, people who mistake ideological chaos for courage. Minnesota, he said, had become a testing ground for every shiny new progressive trend, where classrooms felt more like social experiments and state offices more like activist training camps. Tucker's critique gained momentum as he revisited Walz's pandemic response, this time through the lens of hypocrisy. It wasn't just overreach, he argued. It was arbitrary, biased, and selectively enforced. A church gathering? Dangerous. A local cafe trying to survive? Shut it down. But a protest blessed by Hollywood influencers? That was suddenly essential. According to Tucker, the rules weren't about safety, they were about optics. He shredded the logic, mocking the idea that public health somehow bent around politics like it was made of rubber. And then came Walls's tone. The delivery that Tucker said made everything worse. He imitated the governor's slow, calming cadence, saying it sounded less like leadership and more like a bedtime story being read to an anxious nation. This wasn't confidence, it was condescension. The people of Minnesota didn't need guided meditation. They needed grit. They didn't want a motivational speaker hovering over smoldering rubble. They wanted someone who could walk into the flames and bring order. Tucker's final blow was sharp and cold. Tim Walz, he said, was a man engineered for failure in an era that demanded spine. A politician fluent in the language of empathy, but paralyzed when reality called for action. A leader more comfortable consulting consultants than confronting truth.
Also, interestingly enough, he has a confession letter. This is what I would call it. It's a letter made out to the FBI to Kash Patel that says that Governor Tim Walz made him do this.
By the time Rogan and Carlson wrapped up, Tim Walz wasn't just roasted, he was charred beyond recognition. One had dismantled him with raw, unfiltered mockery. The other sliced through his public image with the cold precision of a surgeon. And somehow, despite their different styles, both landed on the same verdict. Walz wasn't leaving the state, he was presiding over its gradual collapse. And worse, he didn't seem remotely aware it was happening. Joe Rogan jumped back in like a man who just witnessed a magician accidentally make someone disappear, for real. His disbelief was almost comical, but razor-sharp underneath. He zeroed in on what he called Walz's Olympic-level skill at dodging accountability. Rogan joked that Walz could stand in the middle of a city crumbling before his eyes and still manage to blame it on climate shifts, miscommunication, or some abstract, societal failure that never seemed to include him. He compared Walz's leadership to a malfunctioning GPS, recalculating routes while the car sinks deeper into quicksand. One day, Walz is promising safety as the top priority. The next, another police department collapses while he hosts diversity seminars in the ashes. Rogan painted a satirical picture of the governor surrounded by policy advisors who looked like they'd never stepped outside, let alone faced the fallout of their decisions. Then came the press conferences, and Rogan didn't hold back. He mocked Walz's signature look, a man perpetually on the verge of apologizing for something he couldn't name, yet never actually owning up to anything. Rogan called it a masterclass in hollow sincerity, long speeches full of buzzwords, wrapped in fear, coded in indecision, and topped off with just enough smugness to make you forget he hadn't said anything at all.
For
Well,
Congress.
there's more than one thing, too, right? He said he was a head coach.
Yeah, he was a head coach.
He was not a head coach. He was an assistant coach, which is an honorable thing. There's nothing wrong with being an assistant coach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he also inflated his actual rank, right? He was slated to achieve a certain rank.
Right.
And how did it go? Like he had to commit to the fact that he wasn't going to retire in order to...
Tucker, ever the master of calm demolition, shifted focus to what he called Walz's addiction to consensus, the kind that paralyzes instead of unifies. He argued that under Walz, governing had morphed into a never-ending group project, where everyone gets a participation ribbon, and truth is politely avoided in the name of collaboration. Minnesota's chaos, Tucker said, wasn't bad luck, it was cowardice, rebranded as diplomacy. He accused Walz of refusing to lead from the front. Instead, he waits, scanning the crowd, gauging the volume, then cautiously emerging with a pre-written statement and a smile that looks more like a wince. Tucker likened it to someone slipping into the middle of a parade, grabbing a megaphone, and pretending they planned the whole route. This wasn't leadership, it was image management. A calculated blend of awkward humility and political opportunism, neatly pressed into khakis and delivered with a tone that begged, "Please don't be mad." And neither Rogan nor Carlson was done.
I think that, but I can't get past the core fact about Walz, which is he presided over, allowed the biggest city in the state to get burned down.
And seemed to not only allow it, but kind of
Well, he liked
and
it.
support it, you know.
Well, yeah,
kind of,
did you see the video
you know.
of his wife saying, I kept the windows open so I could smell the burning rubber from the
No,
riots?
I did not see that.
The wife whose hand...
Not even close. Rogan wasn't finished, not by a long shot. He circled back to Tim Walz's climate agenda, ripping into it as more performance art than policy. With trademark sarcasm, Rogan mocked the idea that electric buses and solar panels were somehow the cure-all for everything from potholes to public safety. He joked that Walz posed next to wind turbines like they were ancient relics with mystical powers. Once it could power common sense and sweep crime off the streets with a gust of carbon-free air. Tucker, ever methodical, aimed his sights at the state's suffocating tax policies. He painted Walz as a bureaucratic vampire, draining the middle class dry, while handing out ideological participation trophies to keep activist circles happy. According to Tucker, in Walz's Minnesota, hard work gets taxed, and empty virtue earns applause. Together, they didn't just criticize, they built a case. Rogan, with his rolling disbelief and blunt metaphors. Tucker, with his icy logic and cutting delivery. They didn't portray Walz as simply misguided, they cast him as the face of leadership that looks visionary on paper, but crumbles the second real life comes crashing through the door.